I think there's a big mindset shift that was really helpful for me, which is that we think of each contraction as also an expansion. So in yoga, there's this principle called spanda, which is a Sanskrit word, which basically means the constant fluctuation of the universe, so that everything comes into form through this like contraction expansion cycle. And you may have experienced this energetically in your life, like something amazing happens, like you get a promotion, and then there's kind of like that success hangover, right? Where like you maybe don't feel as good or something, goes wrong. And when we understand that, new things are always birthed in this contraction expansion cycle, I think that for me was like a total reframe on the labor process itself. Because I was like, oh, I'm not just contracting. It's like I'm contracting so that my cervix can like dilate and expand.
Getting pregnant and giving birth are two of the most exciting things you can ever hope to experience in this life. The moment you think you could be pregnant, you're frantically searching for all the best information, which is why you're here today. I'm Stephanie King, and with my many years of experience as a professional childbirth educator, doula, and lover of all things pregnancy, birth, and postpartum, I'm here to make preparing for your birth enjoyable, empowering, and totally easy. Each week, I'll cover different topics, interview professionals, and get into the nitty-gritty birth stories from mamas just like you. And when you're ready for more, you can join me in the My Essential Birth course at myessentialbirth.com, where I take you step by step through exactly how to prepare your mind, body, spirit, and partner for a birth you love. So let's get started. Welcome back to the podcast, and this week's reviewer of the week is Lady Abs. She says, "Thank you for such a great podcast. Your very last podcast was made for me, 212, so now I have to go back and listen and figure out exactly why it was made for you." But she said, "My fiance and I want children very soon after we get married. I know exactly the kind of birth that I want. He's hesitant because he's worried something will happen outside of a hospital. I'm definitely strapping him to a chair and making him listen to all your episodes. Ha ha." And I must say, out of all the recommendations that I give you guys, that might be one of my favorites. So if you're still having issues, consider strapping him to a chair, making him listen. We'll be great friends afterwards. All right. This week, you guys, very excited to have here with me Brett Larkin, and she is a founder. She's the founder of Uplifted Yoga and the author of Yoga Life, Habits, Poses, and Breathwork to Channel Joy Amidst the Chaos. Her online yoga teacher trainings have set the standard for quality online certification since 2015 and matriculated thousands of yoga teachers. Brett's award-winning YouTube channel with over 500,000 subscribers and Uplifted Yoga podcast empower you to actively design your life using yoga's ancient wisdom. And for those who are listening today, if you have not heard of Brett, we're going to give you all the places to go and find her, because the more I dug into her Instagram and YouTube and all of that stuff, the more I absolutely love her, and I know she's going to be such a blessing to all of you that are here today. So with that, Brett, welcome to the podcast, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Stephanie. I'm really excited to connect today.
I am too. I think one of my favorite things that I was just like looking over your stuff, your energy is incredible. You are so positive and happy and outgoing, and like start where you're at and let me bring you through this process. And I know as a mom and for pregnant moms that are listening, like that's exactly what we need. That is the exact kind of energy that we need in our life. So I really, really appreciate that. Also, you're a mom, so you get it. Like one of your recent Instagram pictures was like you in the front and two kids behind you just like jumping all over the place. And it's like basically you need yoga in your life, do these things. And I love that.
100%. Yeah. 2 boys under 6. So that is where I'm at. I had 2 very different birth experiences with my 2 children. One was an unassisted at home delivery, and the second one I chose to go to the hospital. So I feel like I can really meet moms and prospective moms like with a range of different experiences. So I'm excited to dive in and hopefully, give people a lot of value today.
Yeah, and I know you will. And we're actually going to talk about those births in a little later into the episode. So if you're here and you're really curious about what she just said, stay tuned because we will definitely go over that because I know, right? My ears are like, wait, tell me all the things. But with that, I kind of want to start chatting about, and I know that I talk about this in my programs. I know I've mentioned it here on the podcast, how beneficial and wonderful yoga can be for moms. But from you, I would love to ask you, what is it about yoga that is so great for pregnant and birthing women?
The list is long, but just a couple things, right? I think a lot of women have this experience, and I know I did. It's like, especially with your first pregnancy, it's like you're going through your regular life and you happen to be pregnant, but you're busy. Like you're working a job, like all of your other commitments remain, like nothing goes away. And so, what I love about the idea of yoga or prenatal yoga or a sacred space for a woman who's pregnant is it actually can become this one time in your day where you tune inward. There's this word in yoga called pratyahara, which is literally like sense withdrawal, but it really means like instead of tuning outward, tuning inward, and doing that practice of tuning in and actually connecting with your baby. Taking a moment to put your hands on your heart and your belly, which is your baby's home, and just find some space to just go inward. And I used to talk to my baby all the time, like, how are you doing? You know, what messages do you have for me? Like, it was really amazing because with my first son, I would do this in meditation with him, and he was constantly reassuring me. It was crazy. He was like, I'm really strong. Everything's going to go great. Mom, don't worry. But the yoga, like, yes, we're going to talk about the physical benefits in a moment, but like just being able to create a space that's just sacred for you and that acknowledges what you're going through, I think can't be underestimated, like how powerful that is, because otherwise we're just rushing around, like trying to live our normal lives and we happen to be pregnant. So that's a huge piece. And that leads to body awareness. The more aware of that you are of your physical body and maybe some of those intuitive nudges that baby's giving you, like that's going to help you in the labor and delivery process. So just knowing your body better, like most of us are very disconnected from our body. Often before we become pregnant, we've never, maybe many women have never done yoga, and then they end up in a prenatal yoga class because the doctor told them it helps with low back pain or it'll make the delivery hurt less. But really it becomes this like whole door opening for women to realize, like, wow, I have a body. I mean, look at our modern world, like Zoom. We're just like these floating heads. We're living in the information age. Everything has been really intellectualized. So, like, getting back literally down into your womb and down into your body is just so, so powerful. And then, of course, you know, there are so many poses in yoga that can help with some of the aches and pains that come with pregnancy. And give you positions to actually birth and labor in. So there's like the stretching and strengthening aspect, there's the making your pregnancy more comfortable aspect, there's the actual like improving your chances of having like a really lovely seamless delivery aspect. And then the breath. The breath is everything. The breath is paramount. Yoga also teaches you how to get comfortable with discomfort. So the way I like to approach prenatal yoga is not just all lovey-dovey, although we do a lot of nurturing things, but I also try to be like, let's use this class as like a microcosm for the labor experience and try to challenge ourselves a little bit so we can experience what discomfort feels like in our body and then how we would alter our breath to rise and support us in that situation. So like, what's my reaction to discomfort and tension in the body, and how can I use my breath to overcome that? So the breathing is great for relaxation, but it's also can be kind of like training wheels. If you, depending how you approach the prenatal practice, is how I approach it. It can also be kind of like labor simulation. So that was a lot, but like yoga and pregnancy, BFFs, like they go really well together. So obviously, I'm a huge advocate of that.
Okay, no joke as you're like talking about all this. These are the kinds of conversations that make me want to be pregnant again. So I'm like, yes, yes, yes. I want to sit and be close with my baby and go through that. It's just all of it together. And I love that you talk about the mental space of it because birth, yes, it is very physical. Yes, there are physical things that we can do to prepare our body. And there is so much mental that happens during that. The pushing yourself past discomfort, the the believing in yourself that you really can go on when you feel like you can't. The like positive talk that you have to do to yourself to be able to get through just one more contraction. That's all very real. And then there's the other side of it where you're going through all the decision making in the middle of being in this labor land that we call it, and being able to trust our intuition. And that's actually something that you had mentioned as well, is that yoga can help you tune into your intuition. And so I'd love for you to talk about that just for a moment. But when the two things I think that you've said so far that are my absolute favorite was one, the like connecting with your baby. Because, and a lot of times I probably need to talk about this earlier on, just like I'm so glad that you're mentioning that and that women are hearing this right now while they are pregnant. Because oftentimes when I'm telling women to reach, inward and talk to their baby, it's like, we've got a breech baby. And it's like, okay, get in the bath, talk to your baby, let them know you need to move, that they need to find the safest position for them, that you love them, that it's safe to be here, all of that kind of stuff. But I love the idea of doing that early on and really having that connection and the like two-way communication that you're talking about. I thought that was absolutely beautiful. And then the like understanding that yes, you have this physical body, like the other side of things of like finding a place of grounding within yourself, I think is incredibly powerful, that we don't do that enough. And you talked about information age, 100%. Like, I'm so tired of staring at a screen. Like, you need to get outside and be with Mother Nature and look at, look even towards the sun, not at the sun, right? But like allow our bodies to take in what's around us. So I think that's really powerful. But if you would, will you touch on that intuition that comes with yoga, which is so important for pregnancy and birth?
Absolutely. This is one of my favorite things to talk about because I think there's this misconception of pregnant women in our modern society of like all these cliches, right? Like pregnant women are irrational. Like what do we always see in the movies? It's like the woman screaming her head off and being crazy in a hospital. Or pregnant women have these cravings, right? They're kind of like these out of control, it's almost like silly, right? Like they have these cravings or they have these aversions or they're difficult or they're high maintenance or they're wacky. And I really love to like dispel this narrative because what's actually happening during pregnancy is that you are more intuitive than you've ever been before. So the pituitary gland, which is a pea-sized gland in the center of your brain, it's behind the eyebrows, just above the eyebrows, is basically the master gland of your body, meaning it's regulating all the hormones and peptides that are secreting in your system. It's kind of like the conductor telling everything in your body what to do. So in yoga, the seat of your intuition, like your energetic base of the intuition, is associated with this pituitary gland. So it's associated with the sixth chakra, meaning that it's where you see that bindi dot, often like right above and between the eyebrows. So there's like a physical seat, which would be the pituitary gland, and then there's this energetic center there, which is where the yogi said intuition resided. Why I'm going into this is because when you're a child, the pituitary gland is very small, and then it actually grows to its full adult size during puberty. Then, when you're an adult, it kind of stays the same size, except when you're pregnant. And when you're pregnant, this pituitary gland actually enlarges. So it's really not crazy to say that like pregnant women are more intuitive. Like there's actually physical things that we can see happening within the brain in your pituitary gland, and it enlarges during this time. So when you have those cravings, that isn't you being crazy. That is you being like deeply, deeply connected to something that you need. And it may seem to someone on the outside irrational, but we don't understand all the different ways that the body works. And maybe a certain food, gives you a sense of comfort or is related to your childhood or makes you feel safe. Like we don't know. Or when you're having an extreme aversion to a food or something just doesn't feel right and you don't know why. Like that's not like wacky, crazy women, like pregnant women. That is you so connected. Like if only we could always be this intuitive, like that would be great. And so the other thing that I love about this is that in yoga, the second chakra, and if people don't know what that word means, a chakra is basically it translates from Sanskrit to mean wheel or disc. It's an energy center that lives inside your body. So we have 7 major chakras that run up and down our spinal column from the base of our spine to the crown of our head. They govern different programs that operate within us, like our love program and how we act in relationships is at our heart chakra, for example. This 6th chakra, what I've been talking about so far, governs our intuition, our ability to have a bird's eye view and perspective on things, kind of see a little bit maybe into the future, like a premonition. And then the second chakra is in our womb space. So it's in the pelvis. And what's really interesting is that according to yoga and also some traditional Chinese medicine, meridians between the sixth chakra and the second chakra are quite prominent. So we actually see, like, energetically, a highway between that pituitary gland, the sixth chakra, and the womb, which means that that when you're pregnant, like, talking to your baby like this isn't crazy. Like, there's actual energetic meridians and pathways that make that connection really clear during a woman's pregnancy. So lots to think about there, but just know that you are powerful during this time. And that's why my prenatal yoga course is called Pregnant and Powerful, because I was sick of going to all these prenatal yoga classes and they were like, you should modify, like you should adjust your practice when you're pregnant. But it felt very condescending, like you're pregnant so you should do less than. And the reality is, actually, you are more powerful during this time than you've ever been before in your life as a woman. And the reason we do want to back off, and I'm sure we're going to get into, tips for each trimester with yoga, but the reason you do want to back off a little bit during pregnancy and maybe not do the most hardcore, crazy, hot yoga, Ashtanga practice is not because you can't or you're weak, but it's because, according to yoga, when you are pregnant, you are in a state of what's called rajas. So, according to yoga, there are these principles called the gunas that govern everything that's manifest here on earth. And something can be in a rajastic state. So, rajastic would be like a tree that's blooming in spring, right? Like just like flowers everywhere in blossom. Something can be in a tamastic state, which is like inertia. So that would be like a tree during winter. It's barren, right? And then a sattvic state, which would be balance between the two. So pregnancy is a state of excess rajas, meaning that you are like making the ultimate creative act in your body, meaning chakras 2 and 3, where a baby is growing, it is like a bonfire there. I mean, pregnant women tend to run hot, right? So you don't need all this heating, challenging yoga. But it's not because you're weak, it's because you're already so strong. You're already in a fire state energetically. Does that make sense, Stephanie?
Yeah, as you're saying that, and I don't know anything about chakras, but that it makes sense as you're saying it. I understand.
Yeah. And then the postpartum period would be that tamastic state, right? Where all of a sudden it's like we had this bonfire in our body and now it's gone, right? Which is why there's a lot of interesting Ayurvedic, which is the nutrition system that goes with yoga, advice for that time period, right? Because mom, it's like going from one extreme to the other. Postpartum yoga also super important.
That's awesome. That's all really interesting. It makes me kind of lead into that next question of like how can women personalize this for themselves then? Because we are so individualistic and then on top of that, pregnant and going through our pregnancies as individuals, what does that look like for a mom who's looking to incorporate yoga into her life?
Well, I think letting go of any expectations is incredibly important. Even I know for some people who might be pregnant with their second, third, fourth baby, I really encourage them, let go of any expectation because every pregnancy is unique for every woman. And then even for the same woman, like subsequent pregnancies are unique. Every mom baby dyad is unique. So I remember having women in my prenatal classes who'd say, like, with my first baby, I didn't feel this way at all. Why is this happening? And so really just having a beginner's mind, if you already have a yoga practice, it's like you're dating yourself in an entirely new body. In pregnancy, your blood volume increases by 50%. Let's think about how crazy that is. Your heart rate's increasing between 10 and 15%, which means you're going to be winded faster. Again, not because you're weak, because you're doing a superhero ability thing here um, as you grow new life within you. So it's like you need to be adapting your practice and kind of seeing, and then your center of gravity is thrown off, right? Because you have potentially baby growing as your belly gets bigger and bigger. So things that used to feel good in your body might not anymore. Like in my book, I talk about the soulmate poses, which are like the, 5 to 6 poses that are really tailored to you and your personality and get you in your flow state, your deepest breath state, the fastest and the most efficiently. And the book's fun. It has like little quizzes that help you find those soulmate postures. But guess what? Those soulmate postures will change during pregnancy. I had low lunge was like a soulmate yoga pose for me pre having kids. Post having kids, it's not. Like, it just doesn't feel that great for me anymore. So you need to be willing, and this takes being humble, especially if you maybe are listening to this and you have a vigorous yoga practice, or you pride yourself in being able to like do a lot of people in their first pregnancy, they pride themselves in being able to do everything the same. But I'd really encourage you to relax and let that go. So in pregnancy, our hormones are fluctuating. The 3 trimesters are so different from one another. So to really be able to, and like anyone listening to this, just start, if you're doing a yoga practice, start your yoga practice just putting one hand on your heart, one hand on baby, taking a couple really deep breaths and just tuning inward and asking, how do I feel? What do I want? How do I feel? What do I want? I think, again, society tries to sell us these, 10-day programs and do the same thing each day. And the reality is with pregnancy, it doesn't work like that. It's so much more dynamic. I mean, even if you're not pregnant, you need a dynamic, personalized practice because we're fluctuating with each day of our cycle. But with pregnancy, it's like everything is increased from the hormones to the blood volume to the amount of relaxin in your system, which is going to make you more flexible, which is why I like to really focus on stability, especially towards the end of pregnancy. So it's that tuning inward and honoring what you need. I mean, maybe you need to just lie down and take a nap and not do any movement at all. Maybe on other days, you need to move a lot. Maybe there's some tension or anxiety that you want to work out through your body. So just being incredibly responsive. I think that's the headline word here, like this responsiveness and tuning in as the first step.
Yes. And you kind of mentioned different trimesters might need different things. So checking in with yourself and then obviously throughout the trimesters, do you have some ideas as to how to tailor that for those different trimesters?
Yes, absolutely. And in my Pregnant and Powerful yoga course, I actually filmed the videos when I was pregnant and I created very different types of yoga and routines for each trimester. So that program actually like works through, there's a trimester 1, trimester 2, trimester 3. The headline word for trimester 1 is rest. Okay, so rest, 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 because what's happening in trimester 1 is you're not just building a baby, you're also building the placenta that's going to nourish the baby. So it's kind of like if you were constructing a city, it's like you're actually building all the construction equipment and the city at the same time. So it's incredibly depleting. And this is, I think, difficult for women when they're pregnant because you're not showing yet. You're maybe not telling people yet. Physically, your body doesn't look that different yet. So you're like, well, I shouldn't need to adapt or modify or take it easy or make all these adjustments because there's not the external physical indicators. However, this actually is the most taxing time of pregnancy because you're building placenta and baby simultaneously. So you're going to be exhausted, and the priority is to focus on rest. So that means poses close to the ground, yin yoga, restorative yoga, yoga nidra, which is a deep yogic sleep. So it's basically like a yogic nap. Uh, I do that now still as a mom almost every single day before bedtime. But really finding these practices that can nourish you and some gentle movement, but you don't want to do anything too fast because often at this time you're also experiencing like maybe heartburn or some of that acid reflux is starting to kick in, right? So it's really about nourishing yourself and taking it easy. And I don't know about you or other women listening, but like I always just remember in each of my pregnancies, there was a day where like all that fatigue was over. It was just like boom. And it was like trimester 2 had begun. And again, just so everyone listening knows, this is not clockwork, right? So it's not like after a certain number of weeks, it's there's variability here. But I know I felt like an energetic shift when it was like, okay. And then what's so beautiful and fun about trimester 2 is that you have all this energy back. It's like placenta has been built, like all the construction equipment has been set up and you get your energy back and you have that like glow, right? Like that prenatal glow and baby's starting to show a little bit. Maybe this is the time in your pregnancy where you're able to like feel baby, feel those first kicks. That's so exciting. And there's actually all these hormones releasing in your body that are giving you like this surge of energy. So this is that like rajastic fire state really kicking in. So this second trimester is when I love to focus on strengthening. This is when I'm like, let's do our squats. Let's start walking, as much as you can complement your yoga practice with walking, just like walking a lot. There's been studies around this, like women who walk a lot during pregnancy have better outcomes in labor and delivery. So lots of walking, lots of squatting, doing more of those strength building poses, strengthening the glutes, strengthening the low back, very light prenatal appropriate core work because baby's getting bigger. I see a lot of pregnant women, trimester 2 and then going into 3, you end up with kind of like that booty pop, which in yoga we call the lordotic lumbar spine becomes even more lordotic because baby's weight is pulling you forward and the spinal curves become exaggerated. Breasts are also getting bigger and heavier, so you can kind of start hunching as well. So all of this strengthening for the back muscles is great to do in the second trimester. So that's a really fun time. It's fun to travel. It's when you want to do your baby moon and you have that energy. So it's like, let's train for labor. That's kind of like my focus in trimester 2. Let's train for labor. Let's get as strong as I possibly can. And then trimester 3, the body is quite big. So this is where a lot of things that maybe felt accessible to you no longer feel that accessible. You're maybe not sleeping as well at night because you're big, like baby's kicking you. So there's a little more fatigue coming back. And now we're really in the weeks leading up to labor. I like to back off on squats after week 30, just because, and if your baby's in a breech position, you want to avoid a lot of deep squatting altogether. But after week 30, it's like we kind of want to keep baby in there where it is. And that squatting is a lot to get baby going down the birth canal. So after week 30, I stop a lot of intense squatting. And the marquee word for trimester 3 is stabilize. We want to stabilize everything, which means less stretching and more strengthening, but not so much the intense, like I'm going to push myself strengthening as trimester 2, but more like labor preparation, like focusing on a lot of asanas that we could actually labor in, like cat cow or maybe holding down dog and doing little training intervals. Like I like to do these exercises where you go into a yoga position that's safe for pregnancy, of course, and hold it maybe just a little longer than is comfortable to simulate a contraction and then come out of it. So that's kind of like what I love doing in trimester 3, tailored with some rest because you are going to be tired. So I'm happy to dive into anything else you want to go into there, Stephanie. But I think that's really helpful if you think of like rest, strengthen trimester 2, and then stabilize for trimester 3. Because just worth mentioning is that when you're pregnant, this hormone called relaxin starts flooding your body, which is great because it's loosening up the ligaments in order for baby to more easily be able to exit your pelvis. So it's making your ligaments kind of like loosey-goosey. But that means it's not the time to be like, oh, I'm going to do my split. I'm going to master, putting my chest on the ground in Upavishta Konasana. Like you have naturally this increased flexibility, which means you actually want to back off of your range and focus more on strength because otherwise you're going to end up tearing something.
That's pretty good advice. One of my favorite things, I'm naturally pretty flexible. One of my favorite things is the relaxin, and I am that person. So, like, do not listen here because I'm like, oh, it feels so good. I'm going to do my splits. I'm going to lean down as far as I can. I'm like, my husband, like, look, it's terrible. But it feels so good to be able to stretch and strengthen all the parts of your body. I just feel so much. It feels good to be in my body during pregnancy and be doing some of these things that you're talking about. Like they naturally feel very good. So I love that you have a program that supports that, and that yoga in general is very supportive of women as they go throughout their lives, and in pregnancy as well as postpartum. So I think that's really excellent. One of the things I wanted to talk about here with you today, and I love how you're talking about the like prep work for all of this. In fact, one of my favorite things that you said was how you allow your body to get into a little bit of discomfort and to decide how you're going to deal with that. Is it going to be breathing, or do I need to relax more, whatever that is? I absolutely love that. It's the reason we talk about labor rehearsals and breathwork practice in general, right? But with that in mind, how can yoga help moms prepare for birth, other than obviously these physical things that we've just talked about and some of those? But what comes to mind for helping moms prepare for birth with yoga?
We've talked about the breath, and the breath is really the secret sauce. I think there's a big mindset shift that was really helpful for me, which is that we think of each contraction as also an expansion. So in yoga, there's this principle called spanda, which is a Sanskrit word, which basically means the constant fluctuation of the universe, so that everything comes into form through this like contraction expansion cycle. And you may have experienced this energetically in your life, like something amazing happens, like you get a promotion, and then there's kind of like that success hangover, right? Where like you maybe don't feel as good or something, goes wrong. And when we understand that, new things are always birthed in this contraction expansion cycle, I think that for me was like a total reframe on the labor process itself. Because I was like, oh, I'm not just contracting. It's like I'm contracting so that my cervix can like dilate and expand. So I think really focusing on positions that you can labor in, whether that's cat cow or a yogi squat, or getting familiar. And I love the word you use, like rehearsals. I mean, the thing about birth is it's just so unpredictable, and I think that's where yoga is also helpful, because most of us don't like uncertainty. Would much rather have a plan. Like it's much more comfortable for our brain to know how things are going to go. But unfortunately, when it comes to birth, even if we write a birth plan and even if we do amazing rehearsals and, take all the incredible courses like yours, Stephanie, like birth just is uncontrollable. Like we don't know how it's going to go. And so I originally came to yoga when I was in college because of anxiety. But I think birth it can cause a lot of women to be anxious just because you don't know how it's going to go, and it's a major event, and it can be a life or death event. So even setting aside like just the labor, I think yoga is so helpful because yoga is ultimately trying to train your nervous system with like, how do I deal with discomfort? Where does anxiety like reside in my body? Where do I feel that? Where can I breathe through that? So I mean, it's kind of what we've already touched on. I think there's a mental piece, there's a breathwork piece, and then there's like actually knowing what to do with your body when those initial contractions start, like having poses that you can go to and flow through. Um, and then there's that internal resilience, right? And the body awareness. Just the body awareness, I think, is so, so valuable, because that's like every time you do yoga, you're getting a little bit more body awareness. And that's going to help you when like there's a contraction that feels weird and you might think, okay, well, like I think maybe I just need to have my right leg like higher than my left, or like, can I prop that leg up, or all of that internal knowledge. It's not something we're taught. It's not something that's put into our school system. It's not something that your OB is going to talk to you about. That's something you need to practice internally in the months leading up to delivery. And it can really be a game changer.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And I agree with you. It's practice, right? And yes, if you don't practice those things, then don't expect them to be comfortable when it's time. It's the same thing that I talk about working with your birth partner in communication. If you guys don't practice talking to each other and working through some practice contractions or whatever together, then when he goes to put his hands on you, it's going to be very foreign during a contraction. You're going to be like, get off, even though you really need him near. So, yes, I think practice in anything that we're doing is really important for when we're talking about things like birth. You keep talking about breath work. I'm wondering if there is something that comes to mind, something that those who are listening right now would be able to do just every day, incorporate into their lives. Do you have some kind of like small meditative like breath work that they can do right now?
There's two breathing techniques I love for pregnancy. The first is the full complete breath, which basically is belly breathing. It means inhaling and trying to sense that your belly or your baby moves out into your hand when you breathe in. When you are pregnant, especially in the later stages of pregnancy, your diaphragm becomes somewhat restricted. And if you have a shorter torso, even more so, right? Like the diaphragm, which is the muscle that powers your respiration, moves down on an inhale and up on an exhale. And so its range of motion, it can't move as much when you're in like the third stage of pregnancy. So that's why women are short of breath, and why the more more we can, try to lengthen and slow down our breathing. And I always like to phrase it as like send your breath down into your baby's home because your baby is living inside of your nervous system. So when you take long, slow, deep belly breaths in a relaxed manner, you're literally signaling to baby, we're safe, everything's okay, you're okay. So it's literally the biggest gift you can give your baby. The breath we can take everywhere. There's no excuse not to do it or not be able to do it. So, and I write about this in the breath chapter in my book, like even just bringing an awareness to how you're breathing, like thinking, you can all think right now as you're listening to this, am I breathing through my nose or mouth? Am I breathing fast or slow? Do I feel the belly more in my chest? Or do I feel the breath more in my belly or my chest? Is the air coming into my nostrils cold or warm? And just asking like those couple observation questions, if you did that with me right now, what's fascinating is your breath immediately starts to slow down and change. Even if you don't make any effort to control the breath, just that inquiry process. And then, of course, if you can do a full, complete breath, even if it feels like your diaphragm can't move as much as you would like, the goal is that you inhale, visualize energy moving down your body as you breathe in. So you're like sending that energy down into your baby, and you should feel your belly button move forward. And then exhale, it's like you give your baby a hug. So you kind of draw the abdominals in a little bit and like snuggle baby. And if you want, you can lift the pelvic floor up as well. So something that's very simple, just like a full, complete breath. You can be sending energy down to your baby, you can be hugging baby as you exhale, and you can actually be incorporating some pelvic floor work as well. And you can do this anywhere. The other breathing technique that I love for pregnant women, especially if you run hot, is what's called Satali Pranayam. This is a cooling breath. And how that one works is you inhale through an open mouth as if you're sucking air in through a straw, or if you can curl your tongue, you can make like a taco shape with your tongue. The idea is that the air should rush over your tongue so it feels kind of cold. So you'd inhale through your mouth with pursed lips, and then exhale through your nose, but do this as slow as possible. So if you're having a really heated moment, or I've had women in much later stages, like in menopause, tell me that this breathing technique like saves them during hot flashes. So I love that cooling Satali water breath for pregnant women as well. It's one of my favorites.
I love those. And thank you, because I love when people can listen in and leave here with something that they can apply to their lives immediately. So I appreciate that. Before we go, though, I want to hear about those birth stories. I'm so interested about this unassisted and then hospital birth. Tell me a little about how that all went down.
Well, I loved what you read at the top of the episode from someone who in your community left a review because I had, I think, a similar situation as her in my first pregnancy. I really wanted to do a home birth, but my husband was not comfortable with it. So we decided to hire a midwife and that I would proceed with my home birth, but that she would alert us if we needed to transfer to the hospital. Or I think I told my husband, like, we'll just transfer to the hospital once my labors progress, and she'll just kind of be like a super doula who comes with us, because I really wanted that midwife care model where I was with her and she was coming to the house through the whole pregnancy. And then, I mean, secretly, I was like, if it just happens at home, it'll just happen at home. So that was sort of like our compromise. And what actually ended up happening is, and this is where it's like you really need to tune inward and not listen to all the cliches, because everyone told me that first babies never come early. Everyone told me that labor lasts like 36 hours or more, especially for a first time mom. It could be days. So when I started going into labor, it was with my first child and it was 10 days early. Or feeling those initial contractions, I just didn't take it that seriously. I was like, oh, well, this is 10 days early. It can't be right. Or, oh, I'm starting to feel this increase and this is starting to feel more intense, but I'm sure this is like hour 2 of 200. So I'm just going to grin and bear it. And I remember just going from like my bathtub to the toilet to the bath mat where I had my yoga mat and a bunch of yoga props. And I was just kind of doing a circuit between like lying in the bath, sitting on the toilet, and then being on this like bath mat with all my yoga props in my bathroom. And it was kind of, I was able to breathe through the contractions. And at a certain point, they started really escalating. And I remember I had one contraction that was so big, my husband was standing in the bathroom with me, and I actually grabbed his pants. And I think I screamed or had such a big contraction that I like ended up pulling his pants down, like in my, uh, and at that point he was like, I think we should call Morgan, who was our midwife. He was like, I think we should call her. Like, I think it's time that we loop her in to come. And I was like, okay, let's do that. Um, and so he called her. At that point, I was in transition. I didn't even know, but I was in transition. So he calls our midwife. She's like on her way to yoga class, like la la la, like driving her car. We called her on FaceTime, and my husband says, I think Brett's, coming, like her labor is progressing and kind of quickly, like, can you come by? And she's like, oh yeah, sure. I was going to go to yoga. I'll come by. And then I had another huge contraction. At this point, I'm sitting on the toilet. And she's like, why don't you show me what's going on? My husband literally shoves the iPhone under me in the toilet. And she immediately saw what was going on, that like I was going to give birth imminently. And so she was just really calm. She's still driving. She's like, okay, Jake, I want you to put the phone down. I want you to get Brett in an all fours position. Can you get her in an all fours position? I think the baby's coming. And we got on an all fours position. I was holding the edge of the bathtub. And then my son, I think it was like the next contraction or the one after, he was born. And my husband had no choice but to catch him. The phone with the midwife was balanced on a yoga block. Our dog was going nuts, barking. I mean, it was chaos. And I remember feeling like pure fear. I mean, I know people talk about labor and it's so blissful, but like in that moment, I just remember feeling like, oh my gosh, fear. And then I remember hearing a baby cry, and I remember not wanting to turn around. Honestly, Stephanie, I was like, I'm not ready. Like, what happened? This was so fast. And I knew that when I turned around, like, life would never be the same. And it hasn't, to be honest, right? Like, once you're initiated into motherhood. But of course, I did turn around, and there he was. And we're so lucky, because there were no complications. He was super healthy. And we just chilled for like 15, 20 minutes on the bathroom floor until the midwife was able to come to the house. And then she was so amazing. She triaged everything. She was able to cut the cord, help me birth the placenta, do all the other things that needed to happen. So it was a fast and furious story. But I really credit yoga, Kundalini yoga specifically, which is what I like to teach, incorporate into my Pregnant and Powerful series, with my ability to tolerate that level of pain. Because I was like, oh, this is really painful, but I can totally handle it. I must still be in the beginning of labor. And I'm not saying that that's going to be true for everyone. I think there's so much that goes into like how you birth and the size and shape of your pelvis, your genetics, like did your mom have an, easy labor? But I do think, I think I naturally was in a good spot. All the women in my family have pretty short labors, but I also think I have to give myself credit because I trained so hard for that pregnancy and delivery, and I really wanted it to be natural. That was just important to me, or like unmedicated to the extent that I could, and to do the home birth, and I did. So I would have liked the midwife there, though. We'll add that. That was a little extreme.
Well, especially for that first baby, that had to be quite the shock that everything
Yes.
moved as quickly as it did. But how neat. What a cool story. And I love the symbolism of like, I know when I'm going to turn, nothing will be the same. And it wasn't.
Hmm.
I think that's that's so neat. It's a neat
Yeah.
part of your story. Tell us about the second one then. So you opted not to have a home birth then. You went to a hospital. I would love to hear your thoughts behind that and then how that experience was for you.
With my second son, I was really tempted to do the home birth again, but I also was a little traumatized. Like I was that luckily we moved homes after that, but I was never really able to go in that bathroom again and feel quite the same way. And that poor bath mat, let me tell you. So what was interesting is with my second pregnancy, it was 2020, and home births were like really popular because people didn't want to go to the hospital because of COVID. And we had just had some changes. My husband had actually joined me full time in my yoga business that year. So we had like not as great insurance. And I was so busy. 2020 was a huge year for online yoga teacher training, let me tell you. So my business was like really scaling. I didn't have the bandwidth, and I just sat and I was like honest with myself because unfortunately it shouldn't be this way, but it is. Doing the home birth is harder, right? It's like more paperwork, more submitting for reimbursement, more claim forms. Then once the baby's born, you have to go to the hospital for all these appointments that you don't do because you gave birth to the baby at home. You have to go get the birth certificate. And with COVID and what was happening with my business and our insurance not being as great, I was like, you know what? And also friends had told me it's really hard to get a midwife because everyone wants them now. So I said, maybe this is my sign, especially because I teach prenatal yoga and I love working with pregnant women. Maybe this is my sign that I should just experience the other side of this because maybe it would also help me be able to like better relate to my students who are going into a hospital. And I said, you know what? Let's just try the hospital for this go round. And of course, I got a great recommendation for an OB, and I chose a very specific hospital that I thought would, meet the values and what I was looking for. So so similarly, I felt I felt that labor was starting. I get to blame my husband for this because he made us go to IKEA to return a mattress. So I was doing like all this physical. I know who makes their like third trimester wife do this. I don't know. We like hold this over him forever. But anyway, and I'm in IKEA and I'm like, we've returned this mattress, and I'm like, I think this like stirred something up. I think it was maybe 12 or 15 days early at this point. So even like a little earlier. So I started to feel that baby was coming. And it's really nice the second time because you're like, okay, I remember this. And it was so funny. I just got on Amazon because we didn't have the stuff we needed yet. And I'd rented a snoo. For those of you who don't know, it's like this robot bassinet. I personally loved it. So I was like, okay, the snoo had been rented, but I think it was coming like on his due date. So I was like, we got to change the snoo rental. So I'm like in this kind of early labor in the middle of the night by myself, like ordering swaddles on Amazon, doing all the things. And then again, it progressed pretty quickly to the point where I was like, okay, I'm not waiting. I'm going to the hospital like on the early side because I know that I can progress really fast. So I woke my husband up. I was like, I'm going to go to the hospital. He was like, okay, I'll drive you. I'm like, nope, I'm taking an Uber. Like, because we needed to wait for our nanny like to get here because we had my older son at home. So I was like, nope, I'm not waiting for like anyone to come over or you to get organized. Like I'm leaving now. Like we're not having any surprise urgent births. And then it was such a weird experience, Stephanie, because I went to the hospital. They checked me in. I was in like one of those little pre-triage rooms before they allow you to come in. And I told them, I was like, I think I'm going to give birth in the next hour. I was like, I feel exactly like I did, with my first son. I gave birth really quickly. And they insisted on giving me a vaginal exam, which I really did not want to do for personal reasons. I kept saying no. And they're like, well, we can't admit you unless we do it. So I remember being very annoyed about that. So then I let them do it, and it was so painful. It was like the most painful thing I've ever experienced, like more painful than the contractions. And they kept saying, well, we can't really see your cervix. We can't get a clear cervix read. Like, we don't know how dilated you are, so we still can't admit you. So she got her supervisor to come back. The supervisor's like, okay, I'm going to give you a vaginal exam now. And I'm like, are you kidding me? I'm like, okay, fine. She does it. It hurts so much. And so I kind of like, I couldn't even do it. And she's like, I'm just really confused. I can't see how dilated your cervix is. Like, all I really see is your baby's head. And I'm like, yes, I think that's because I'm giving birth.
Oh
Like this
my goodness.
legit came out of her mouth. Like, I'm not kidding. So then I'm like, I want a doctor. I was like, get me a doctor, get me a doctor. And they had me hooked up to all the machines, which is interesting, like information age, right? Because it's like they had all this data and monitors and things on me, but they kept saying that none of my contractions on the machine were showing big enough to be able to admit me. And they couldn't get the cervix dilation reading or measurement or whatever. And I was so fortunate because what are the odds? My OB happened to be on call. So she knew me and she knew my history. So she comes in and she's like, I want to give you a vaginal exam. I'm like, nope, nope. I'm like, never again. I was like, nope,
We're past
that ship has sailed. Like, we're not doing that. And she's like, yeah, like I know you labor really fast. I know your background, but like, again, we can't admit you because there's no contractions on the machine that are showing big enough. And, and I guess I just seemed really calm to them. So then I remember I had a really big contraction. And of course, I was like turning over and like kind of wanted to be on all fours. And they didn't like that. They were like, that's messing up the nodes on my belly or changing the reading or something. And I had a somewhat big one. And she was like, okay, that one was like just big enough that I can admit you. So I'm going to get you in a room. So they are like, okay, you're going to get admitted. You're going to get to go in a room. And then they're prepping the room. And then I just start giving birth.
Oh
And then
my gosh.
they all go nuts. They call the doctor back because she had like just left. And they were like, I don't even remember, but they were like, code, whatever. Like, she's giving birth. She's giving birth. And they were like, change her to this room because I guess there was a room that was like closer to the triage station. So they wouldn't have to move me as far. So we like rush into this room. I did manage to like somehow they get a gown on me. I remember it was really interesting. I didn't take off my socks. Like there was no time to take off my socks. So I gave birth like looking at these rainbow socks that I was wearing. It was so funny. But then I gave birth like immediately. The minute I entered the new room, I gave birth within 4 minutes. And then, what was great about the hospital is there was so many people there. I mean, from being alone, there was like 8 people in my down there, like immediately. I was like, can we wait to cut the cord? And she was like, we did wait, snip. I'm like, so that was very fast. I was surprised compared to like the 20 minutes I had on the bathroom floor with my son. But honestly, everyone was great. It was really hysterical because I had my baby in my arms. Um, and the woman had to do my intake form. So she was like, are you considering a water birth? Or like, would you like to birth in the tub? And it's like, I'd already given birth, but I still had to like answer all these silly questions as if like I had just come in the room for like paperwork reasons. So we got a kick out of that. But yeah, so that was baby number 2. So also very fast. And then my overnight stay in the hospital, I can't say that I loved that. I didn't sleep well. They were constantly coming in and like waking us up or waking him up. And I thought they would help me a lot. I thought someone would like help me watch the baby, but that wasn't the case. And because it was COVID and because we had our older child, my husband luckily made it just in time for the birth. But then I sent him home because I wanted him to be with our older son. So that first night, I really felt alone. Like, I think because of COVID, the nurses weren't checking on people as much as they normally do. But I just remember like hobbling around that little hotel, I guess not a hotel room, birth room, I guess, changing the baby's diaper by myself, trying to pee by myself, like just feeling really stressed out. And he at one point wasn't breathing that well. I guess he had some fluid in his lungs or something. And I freaked out and I used that little plunger thing. But I was like, why isn't someone watching him? And then I started requesting the nurses. I was like, can you not wake us up, but like check on us regularly? So it was very interesting. I was really excited to get out of there when I was able to check out the next morning. But yeah, so very, very different experiences. But I have to say, my postpartum recovery, I felt like after the hospital birth was better. I feel like they just knew, like they gave me ibuprofen. Like I felt like they knew either the stitching that they did or something. It felt more easeful than the first time. So I do say that, but it's always an adventure. So grateful to have the healthy babies, and you know, everyone loves sharing their birth story. So I could go on, but I'll leave
No,
it
the
there.
birth story, those are incredible and they are such a contrast. And it's so interesting to see you do the unassisted and then go into the hospital. And I kind of love your mindset behind that of like, how can I help other women with this information? I appreciate you being willing to do something like that and have that experience because I absolutely know that you will be able to relate to women on all kinds of levels because of that. I'm over here, like the doula in me is just going nuts, right? Listening to how the hospital handled things. But I mean, but what a neat, like, I feel like you have such a good attitude about everything and the way it went down. I'm glad you clarified that your husband was there. That was going to be one of my questions. My other one is about the Uber driver. I'm like, you got in the car with this guy. Like, what was that
It was a
conversation?
guy.
What did that look like? And how long were you in there? Like, talk to me about the Uber drive.
Oh man. Yeah, it was, I mean, I'm sure it was like 4 in the morning or something. And it was some guy. And, he was pretty cool. I definitely was having some pretty big contractions in the back of the car. But yeah, he dropped me off at the hospital and it was all good. I'm sure he was a little nervous, but
He's
he
probably
didn't
like,
show it.
please don't break your water all over the car, have the baby in the car.
Yes,
Oh
he
my
gets an A
gosh,
plus.
so
And
funny.
I don't think I even told him necessarily that I was in labor, but then, I was calling people
Mm.
from the back of the car, like my mom, and I think he kind of figured it out. And yeah, he probably drove a little faster. So I know I didn't want to tell him and then he'd be like, you can't get in my vehicle. I was like, I'm
Awkward.
getting
Yeah.
in. And if he figures out what's going on, great. But yeah, it
Oh.
was pretty funny. Yeah. And then, one thing I'll add if we have time is, I told you how that second, just in case I love sharing this just in case any other woman has this happen to her. After that second delivery, I felt like I healed really fast. And I think a lot of that was the thanks to the hospital and the medication and the stitching and whatever. But I also had very little postpartum bleeding, much less than I remember the first time around. And I remember thinking like, oh, I'm like a rock star. Like this is great. Like I remember being on a walk a week or 8 weeks after, or 8 days, sorry, after giving birth and like just feeling awesome. Like this is great. And then what actually happened to me, Stephanie, is I was on a call like this, just exactly where I'm sitting talking to you, teaching my 200-hour online yoga teacher training, because there's a home study portion and a live portion. I'm giving a lecture, I'm answering a student's question, and I feel like I've peed my pants. This is 10 days after giving birth. And I'm like, what? And I'm like, did I just pee my pants? And so I'm like trying to listen to the student and answer their question. I look down, blood everywhere. It was just like crazy, crazy amounts of blood. And so I'm like nodding at the student. I'm like, Jen, who's my teaching assistant, I'm like, can you take over? I need to run check on something. I like turn my camera off. I scream for my husband, who was luckily here. He walks in, freaks out. It looks like some sort of crime scene. I mean, it was just insane how much blood. And so we had to go to the emergency room with my son. He was like, we're bringing the baby just in case he needs to like nurse or whatever. So, what had actually happened is that I hadn't experienced all this postpartum bleeding because it was behind a blood clot, like a very thick blood clot, and that clot dislodged. So luckily, I know there's another, of course, it's escaping my mind right now. There's something very dangerous that can happen to women after birth where they actually hemorrhage, which is why we went to the emergency room. But luckily, it was not a postpartum hemorrhage. It was just like all this postpartum blood that was like behind this one clot, and somehow that clot shifted, and there was a lot of blood released. So it was great. We drove, and this is a great tip for women too. Like my husband was so smart because I was like, we could have gone to the closest emergency room, and he was like, no, let's drive to where you gave birth. It was, like 10 minutes farther or something. But it was so great that we did that because when we went to their ER, they were actually able to bring up all my blood work that they had on file and compare it to what was happening when we checked in. And I think it really helped them figure out what was going on and us get out of there faster. So yeah, weird, but I always like to just share that story because even after birth, things can happen that are strange. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. I think that's excellent. And again, just all the stuff that you've been through and you're just smiling about it. And it makes me so happy. I'm so grateful that that you have a good experience after.
Yeah.
Okay, before we jump off, I would love to ask you what is your very best advice for pregnant moms that are listening right now that want to start incorporating some kind of yoga into their lives? What would be your best advice for them be? And then I want you to list all the places that we can find you and your book, because I've heard really great things about the book, that it's not just like every other yoga book, that it's better in a lot of ways and incorporates a lot of different things. So tell me a little about that.
Yeah, my number one piece of advice is to focus on your breathing. Do that belly breathing that we talked about earlier. As you're walking around, as you're sitting in the waiting room for your next appointment, tell your baby everything's okay by breathing into your belly. And the reason, if it's just one thing I tell you that is because your nervous system is like the ecosystem that everything else is living in. And if you can slow down and deepen your breath, it's going to soothe your nervous system. And then everything else from there will flow more easily. My book is called Yoga Life. So it's really easy to remember. It's just Yoga Life. It's enabling you to develop a personalized, adaptable 20-minute yoga ritual that you can practice at home, as well as all my yoga habits that you can practice off the mat. Because once you have kids and a business, you're very busy. So these are all the little ways I sprinkle yogic wisdom into my day when I'm driving around or making tea. So there's a lot of fun yoga philosophy in there. And it comes with an adaptations appendix at the end of the book. And I do have a huge section on pregnancy in there. So, like, after you create your 20-minute routine, which I make really fun, there's like little quizzes. The part in the back of the book, you can cross reference and see what's going to work for you if you happen to be pregnant right now. My website is brettlarkin.com, BRETT with two T's, Larkin.com. And you can find me on YouTube if you just Google my name. I have a ton of prenatal videos on YouTube. And my Pregnant and Powerful course, there's a student version and a teacher version if you happen to be a yoga teacher, but you want to know more about teaching prenatal yoga. All of that is on my website. So super, super happy to be here. And Stephanie, thank you so much for having me and wanting to hear these stories, which are always so fun to tell. And yeah, everyone focus on your breathing today. That is my number one tip.
That's perfect. Thank you. Yes, thank you for your time and for being here as well. If you loved what you heard today, the very best way to support this podcast and help other moms to find it is to leave a quick review. I read one at the beginning of the episodes, and I would love for yours to be next. And if you're ready for even more pregnancy, birth, and postpartum goodness, come join me in the My Essential Birth course at myessentialbirth.com, where I will hold your hand and walk you through pregnancy and birth step by step so you're totally prepared for a birth you'll love. See you next week.